Hey everyone, welcome to the pilot episode for Let's Command. In this episode, we're going to be going over my favorite commander in all of Magic the Gathering, Experiment Kraj. So before I forget, I will mention I do know that the Tolarian Community College did do an Experiment Kraj video, but mine is going to be a little different from that one, because obviously this is me thinking up of cards to put in a deck. So you're going to see some similarities, but you're going to see a lot of differences. As per usual, I'll be following my rules for these commander decks. I'm going to take into account budget and try to only put really inexpensive cards in here unless it's something completely and totally necessary. So you'll see Hardened Scales mentioned, but you won't see Doubling Season mentioned. A little background on Kraj itself. Experiment Kraj was the brainchild of Momir Vig, former leader of the Simic Guild on the plane of Ravnica. All of the blue guilds on Ravnica at one point in the Ravnica backstory tried to take over the entire plane through nefarious means, and Momir Vig was no exception. His plan was to have Experiment Kraj basically rewrite the entire plane. Go out there, ooze around, and turn everything into Simic-y stuff. Momir Vig's plans were cut short, however, when Argus Kos, possessing the body of a Simic guard as a ghost, stabbed Momir Vig in the face and killed him, just on the cusp of when Momir was going to launch Kraj. This proved insanely detrimental to pretty much everyone involved when Kraj went on a rampage and sucked all the cytoplast off of everything on the plane. Cytoplast, if you look at the older Simic artwork, is sort of that blue glowy stuff on all of the creatures, and it gave the creatures special abilities. And in the actual book itself, there was a character that had a cytoplast hand as an artificial hand, and that was sucked right off of her and into Kraj. Kraj then grew to an immense size and started roaming around the city, where it ran into the newly revived, or should I say re-revived, Rakdos, and the two got in an epic kaiju fight. Eventually, Kraj tried to absorb Rakdos, which proved to be fatal to the Ooze mutant. Kraj died, unfortunately, in the attempt to absorb Rakdos, and Rakdos went back into his pseudo-eternal slumber. So let's look at Kraj itself. For 2 green and 2 blue, you get a 4/6 legendary creature, Ooze Mutant. Kraj has 2 abilities. The first of which is Experiment Kraj has all activated abilities of each other creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. This counts for your creatures, this counts for creatures opponents control. His second ability is tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Again, you can pretty much target any creature that is targetable. This allows you to pass around +1/+1 counters to your creatures and enemy creatures that have abilities you would like to take over. So knowing this, let's go over our deck goals. The first of which is we want to combo with Kraj. Comboing with Kraj is really fun. You'll get to do a whole lot of tinkering and a whole lot of sciencey stuff. So I want the comboing to be both fun and effective. So I have some things in here that are they're made to combo with the guy. They're made to combo with the big ol' Ooze mutant. They're made to combo in some fun ways, mostly for you, but also effective ways, like say with Fathom Mage to draw you lots of cards, or things that can untap themselves, or have the ability to be untappable, and give them the Kraj so he can tap to put +1/+1 counters on things and then just untap himself and do it all over again. However, I'm not going to go silly in this deck. I'm not going to go for the let's animate a Planeswalker so Kraj can use its +1 ability. Yeah, there are several ways to do that, but I'm not going to do it in this deck. Obviously, +1/+1 counters are going to be a theme here, as is making sure the Simic Guild will actually take over everything in your game of Magic. Finally, we of course want to science, and we want to science the shit out of everything. And the way we're going to do that is through the biological manipulation of creatures, which is represented by +1/+1 counters. So across the 2 blocks that featured the Simic Guild, the 2 keywords were Graft and Evolve. I have 5 Grafters in this deck. Plaxcaster Frogling, Cytoplast Manipulator, Aquastrand Spider, Cytoplast Rootkin, and the Vigian Graft Mage. The Frogling is a great, inexpensive creature that can basically give everything you have on the field Shroud. Because let's face it, I'm going to say this once, and you should just consider it for every single one of these cards that do things with +1/+1 counters. Everything you have is going to have a +1/+1 counter on it. At least one, most likely a whole lot. So, Plaxcaster Frogling will give them Shroud. The Manipulator ability is mostly for Kraj to hand out counters to enemy creatures and for the Manipulator to take them over. You can also, through the Graft ability on the Manipulator, throw a counter on the thing and have Kraj take it over. You can also sort of chain it together if you want to make it really, really complicated. Additionally, if the enemy has something that's distributing +1/+1 counters onto their own creatures, you can essentially do this twice per turn, or should I say twice per tap cycle, where you can have Kraj take a thing and the Manipulator take a thing. The Spider is a nice little source of giving things reach. This can help you deal with some pesky flyers. You'll generate a lot of green mana with this deck, so having it at a cost is actually not a huge deficit for you. You could also, if you want something that is more expensive to get onto the field, use the Helium Squirter, but I personally prefer the Spider. The Rootkin is in here for his burst of +1/+1 counters, and for flavor. The Rootkin's ability to take +1/+1 counters from another thing and move it onto itself will be inherited by Kraj, which is basically what Kraj did when it was activated and went nuts. Of course, the Vigian Graft Mage is here because it'll allow Kraj to untap himself. You'll also be able to untap all sorts of fun stuff that you're going to see as we move forward in this deck. I'm running 4 Evolvers for the second keyword: Fathom Mage, Experiment 1, Renegade Crassus, and Simic Manipulator. The Fathom Mage gets really stupid powerful with Experiment Kraj, because he can essentially tap to put a counter on her and you'll draw a card. She'll also be able to evolve pretty easily given the other creatures you'll have in this deck, but it's mostly for that interaction between Kraj and her. Experiment 1 is there mostly to give Kraj the ability to regenerate himself. That probably would have helped him in his fight with Rakdos. Kraj will be able to get a lot of counters on himself, and removing 2 to regenerate him, and actually removing 2 to regenerate Experiment 1 is not bad at all. The Renegade Crassus, basically when it evolves, everything else with the counter on it will evolve as well. This guy won't be evolving forever, but he will get you some extra value out of putting +1/+1 counters on a whole lot of things that you have on the field. Obviously, at some point, you'll want to bounce him or have it die so you can reset its counters and then start the evolution all over again. Or you can combine it with, say, the Rootkin. Pull all of the counters off of the Renegade Crassus and keep the evolution going. And finally, of the 4, we have the Simic Manipulator. It's here to take over more things, just like the Cytoplast Manipulator. So the next 5 creatures are all creatures that enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counters on them. The Spike Weaver is an all-star workhorse of this deck. Spike Weaver, you can tap 1, remove a +1/+1 counter from it, and prevent all combat damage this turn. The more players you have, the less all-starry this guy gets. But even then, with Kraj, you'll basically be able to fog out enemies every turn in a 1v1 game. In a multiplayer game, you have to pick and choose which fights you want to engage in and which ones you want to fog, unless you've already, of course, got a crap ton of +1/+1 counter generation going on. Then, I mean, sky's the limit with this guy. Forgotten Ancient is really cool. Whenever anyone casts a spell, he gets +1/+1 counter, and at the beginning of your upkeep, graft everything is how you can look at this guy. He's great for distributing your counters around. He can do it a lot of times, unlike Kraj's pretty much one time until you get Untappers out. So he's a pretty handy little guy to hand out counters to all the creatures you want counters on. Fertilid is a great creature for repeatable land fetching. Triskelion is probably the first really heinous card I'm showing off, because with Triskelion and with Kraj inheriting an untap ability, you can essentially turn either the Triskelion or Kraj himself into a machine gun. Because Kraj can tap himself, put a counter on himself, be untapped by one of the various untappers in the deck, you remove that counter, boom, 1 damage to target creature or player. Alternatively, of course, you can put it on the Triskelion and have the Triskelion do the machine gunning. But you can see, if you get the ability to untap multiple times a turn, or when you start to enter the infinite on your untaps, you can, kill everything. Just kill it all. You will have the Simic Guild succeed in its initial plan, and Momir Vig should be very proud of you. So the last of this set of cards is the Altered Ego card from Eldritch Moon. It can't be countered, and when it enters the battlefield, it enters as a copy of another creature, except it has X+1/+1 counters on it. This will basically give you any creature you want doubled, and for essentially 5 mana, they'll start with the counter on them. This can be really, really powerful when paired with like Cytoplast Manipulator, or something that can untap, or something that taps for mana that you want another instance of. Really, really solid card. It'll also instantly hand that ability to Kraj, should that be an ability you want copied. So the next 5 creatures, Karametra's Acolyte, Arcanus the Omnipotent, Ulvenwald Tracker, Sage of Hours, and Elvish Aberration are all creatures that require a counter to be thrown on them to get their abilities. Karametra's Acolyte is great for mana generation. Once you get your Devotion to Green 3, which is really easy to do, given that you'll have her and Kraj out, you can start to do some really heinous stuff with some of the cards you'll see in this list going forward. Arcanus essentially gives Kraj 2 abilities, the ability to draw 3 cards, or the ability to jump through a hoop in order to avoid, say, a board wipe. It's a pretty handy pair of abilities, and drawing 6 cards a turn can get really, really ridiculous, especially once you gain the ability, of course, to untap Kraj. Ulvenwald Tracker gives you a nice little bit of repeatable spot removal. Kraj will copy the ability, obviously, so you can get 2 procs of it. Sage of Hours is the other really heinous thing I'm showing off in this deck, because all you need to do is untap Kraj 4 times and you have infinite turns. And 4 times is really, really easy for Kraj to have. Now, Elvish Aberration, I'm probably going to switch it out for Gyre Sage, but I don't have, since this is my actual deck I'm showing, I don't actually have a second Gyre Sage, and she is Occupado at the moment. So Elvish Aberration is in the deck for now. The main reason I'm not a big fan of him is he only does 3 green mana. Gyre Sage can essentially do infinite. He costs 6, Gyre Sage costs 2. But Elvish Aberration will have to do for the time being. The next 3 cards I'm pointing out are the 3 Lings. Aetherling, Morphling, and Thornling. I run all 3. Aetherling lets Kraj bounce, makes him unblockable. Morphling makes him untappable, most importantly. Also can give him flying and shroud. Thornling can give him haste, trample, and indestructible. And obviously all 3 of these can manipulate Kraj's power and toughness. All in all 3 Lings are really awesome, and I highly recommend them for an Experiment Kraj deck, especially since they represent the Tinkerage aspect of the big ol' ooze mutant. The next set of creatures is a big ol' list of things that either untap themselves or untap things when they tap. So the Devoted Druid can tap for a green, so it's essentially a tiny little mana dork, but you can put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. Kraj can inherit that ability. And it's kind of funny, you could dirtle him forever by having him tap for a +1/+1 counter, then you untap him with a -1/-1 counter, and repeat. But obviously, if you have a source of counter multiplication, like say Hardened Skills, you can essentially pass around infinite +1/+1 counters at that point. Gilder Burn. Tap 2 and a blue or green and untap it, and then you double the counters on a permanent. Obviously a really powerful ability when you've got Kraj who puts counters on things. It's a little costly compared to other sources of untapping, but the ability is really, really solid. Leech Bonder. I don't care so much about the actual moving a counter from one creature to another. It's mostly the fact that it's blue and untap it. This essentially means Kraj can tap to put a counter, then you tap a blue and you can untap Kraj. Pretty cheap way, another cheap way to untap him easily. And I say another because of the next 2 cards, Horseshoe Crab and Simic Ragworm. They both are tap a blue, untap it. Kraj inherits those abilities, obviously. So you can start untapping Kraj for a blue with any of those 3 cards. Naxaw Click has 1 in a blue, untap. Target opponent removes the top card of his or her library from the game. Till the end of turn, you may play that card. If you're playing someone who shares colors with you, this can be a pretty solid advantage. There isn't a whole lot of mana generation for colors beyond blue and green in this deck, and I wouldn't try to build around this card in particular, but it's pretty good at just taking out a top deck threat, especially if they tutor for something. Or like I said, if they share colors, you can actually get some pretty advantageous cards out of it. Cura's Follower and the 1,000-Year Elixir are one-time untaps. They're more there for being tools to untap rather than doing some crazy infinite thing. Getting one-time untaps on Kraj when he's generating a lot of mana or another creature when it's generating a lot of mana is just a really solid thing to have in the deck. Corrosion Restorer can untap a land, or with Threshold can untap 3. This again will allow you, with a lot of these cards, to enter the infinite with Kraj. Like say with Umbral Mantle here. Or with the other really heinous obvious card to put in a Kraj deck, Pilla. These two artifacts will let you untap Kraj and tap to do some pretty cool things. It's pretty easy to get to that infinite marker with them as well. And then to round out our untappers, we're running a Murkfiend Liege. Not only is it a good lord for all of your creatures, you'll give a lot of things +1/+1, and you'll give a lot of things +2/+2, in addition to being able to untap everything every single turn. Obviously, this guy will get more work done with more opponents. You could also run Seedborn Muse. I have one, but I'm saving it for a Rajmi deck, I think. And then finally, our sole Planeswalker in the deck is Kiora, Master of the Depths, mostly for her +1. Her -2 and her ultimate are not bad, obviously. I've used them, but I mostly have her here for that +1. An additional untap, including untapping, a land on top of a creature, is pretty solid. So speaking of heinous abuse of Kraj's abilities, we have the Will Breaker and Dismiss into Dream. Will Breaker, when you start getting into passing around counters at a high rate, you can pass them around to a lot of things while Will Breaker's on the field and just take them. It's almost a sub-theme of the deck, given that that's the third gain control of target thing when you do the thing card in the deck. And Dismiss into Dream, when you start getting those machine gun counters out, Dismiss into Dream can be a real pain, because you'll just kill everything the opponent puts on the field. And, of course, open the way for your attacking. Next up, we're going to look at things that generate counters beyond Kraj, or generate more counters with him, like, say, Hardened Scales. You could run Doubling Season, you could run Primal Vigor. I do own a Doubling Season, but it is in another deck presently. Hardened Scales basically will do the job for Kraj that Doubling Season does. Anyways, there aren't a whole lot of token generators in this deck, so I figured Hardened Scales will work just fine for getting more counters out of Kraj's main ability and the various +1/+1 counter abilities you have with the deck already. Hardened Scales also only costs a single mana to get out, so it's really cheap, and it's actually a relatively inexpensive card, especially compared to Doubling Season. Bred for the Hunt, you'll have pretty much all your creatures with +1/+1 counters, and Bred for the Hunt will basically act as Coastal Piracy. This card could be cut if you want more land or another creature. I'm using it because it is pretty useful to have in a deck based around +1/+1 counters. Inexorable Tide, you cast a spell, you proliferate. It is really solid. Master Biomancer, of course Master Biomancer's in this deck. He's a Master Biomancer. You can't not include him in a Kraj deck. You can't not include him in a Simic deck. He is the Master Biomancer. So both for that flavor reason and the fact that his ability is really good, I have him in here. Also with Kraj, even though you won't steal this ability, you can increase it incrementally, especially when you get into that stage where you have, say, Hardened Scales out. Then you have a 4/6 Master Biomancer, giving things +4/+4 whenever they enter the battlefield. Really solid, really great card. I almost wish he were legendary. Verdant Confluence is in this deck, mostly for its first ability to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature, and being able to do that 3 times. So you can throw that on a single creature, you can throw that on 3 creatures. Either mode works, but also its other abilities are pretty solid as well. Getting things back from your graveyard to your hand, searching up more mana late game can give you a nice push to finish things off, and 6 mana is actually not bad for green early game, so you can actually just get more land out of it should you so desire it. Illusionist Bracers will let you do a second proc of Kraj's ability should he be wearing them. And then I have both of the Guild Mages in here. The Simic Guild Mage, when you move those counters around with Hardened Scales out, you'll actually get a second counter out of it, and you can move counters around enemy creatures, and you can move enchantments around. Mostly for this deck, if you have Cross's Incubation out, you'll be able to move that around to pacify things that are threats. But also if you're fighting something that's enchant creature heavy, you can move those around as well. The Zamek Guild Mage's first ability is nice. It's Nova Gen ability, but I mostly have it in here for its second ability to remove a counter and draw a card. Up next are my removal cards. Cross's Incubation, Imprisoned in the Moon, Rapid Hybridization, Mystic Snake, Plasm Capture, and good old-fashioned counterspell. Cross's Incubation and Imprisoned in the Moon for the pacifism effects. Rapid Hybridization for the targeted destroy of an annoying creature. Mystic Snake for the counter and then having a body floating around, Plasm Capture for the counter and the mana boost, and of course, Counterspell for the counterspell. This being blue-green, of course, we have Acceleration. The first thing is Coiling Oracle, which is one of my favorite cards ever. It is so simple and elegant that I can't resist putting it in pretty much every blue-green deck I have. Unexpected Results is in here mostly for flavor, but also for fun. If you get its land proc, you can do it all over again. But if you don't get the land proc, if you get anything else, you get a free card out of it. Urban Evolution is in here for the nice card draw, ability to play a second land per turn, and I believe in the gate crash testing, the prototype card was just called Science. Evolution Charm is in here for its utility. You can get a land, get something back from your graveyard into your hand, or give a creature, like say a giant-ass Kraj, flying. It's also called Evolution Charm, and of course we're the Simic Guild, and we want evolution as represented as possible. My two spells that pull up lands are Kodama's Reach and Farseek. Farseek could probably be replaced for Cultivate or some other form of land ramp. I like Farseek though because it'll get you your breeding pool. And lastly, for this little section, my two rocks are the Soul Ring, of course, and the Simic Signet. So rounding out our non-land cards are these two cards I didn't know which category to put them in, the Simic Signet and Eternal Witness. Both provide you with some really nice utility. Simic Signet is also a Simic card, so I figured we should probably include it in a Simic-themed deck. And then finally we have Primetime, Varel of the Hallclade, and Momir Vig himself. Of course we had to put Momir in because he got Kraj, or at least attempted to get Kraj going. Varel's ability is nice. You'll be able to give it to Kraj, though for you it's pretty much limited to +1/+1 counters, of course. And Primetime can refill your hand late game, or give you a little boost early game. Of course, you'll want to figure out a way to bounce her, or have her die and get back in your hand with one of the methods you have to get things back in your hand in order to have her ability work all over again. So for my fetching lands, I have Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds, and Myriad Landscape. Utility lands, I have Mosswort Bridge, Halimar Depths, and Ghost Quarter. And then for my +1/+1 counter-related lands, Novajin Heart of Progress, Oran Reef the Vastwood, and Llanowar Reborn. For your mana fixing, you can do your standard loadout for blue and green. I'm running Command Tower, Breeding Pool, Hinterland Harbor, Simic Growth Chamber, and actually the Simic Guildgate mostly for flavor. And maybe in the future I'll replace it with a Temple of Mystery or Lumbering Falls, but for now I'll just leave it the Guildgate. And again, that's mostly for flavor. Alrighty, that is gonna cover the inaugural pilot episode of Let's Command. We covered a pretty solid Experiment Kraj deck. This is pretty much my personal commander deck. I like to play a lot. He's my first commander. He'll probably be a commander for a really long time for me. If you guys would like to see me do a particular commander, cover a particular card or set of cards, or do another commander deck, or kind of core of a commander deck, not the whole deck, but maybe like 30 or so cards that can make a commander deck really fun, please let me know in the comments below. Please check out my Patreon page. It is patreon.com/wolfoverclocked. You'll find a link in the description below, and one should be appearing on the video right about now. The font I used was Expansiva Bold. You can find the link on the video. And of course, I have Mark Teeden's website here because I pretty much had his artwork up the entire time. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a fabulous day, and I will see you guys next time.